Welcome to the Resilience Series. I'm Stephanie Weaver, the author of the Migraine Relief Plan and the upcoming Migraine Relief Plan cookbook. I'm interviewing a variety of people about living well while managing a chronic condition. And my guest today is Julie Rehmeyer. Julie is an award-winning mathematics and science writer and the author of Through the Shadowlands, a science writer's odyssey into an illness science doesn't understand. Welcome, Julie.
Really delighted to be here.
So glad to have you. So tell us briefly about your background as a science writer before you became ill.
So I actually started as a mathematician.
Okay.
I was a graduate student at MIT, and then I taught at St. John's College, which is a great books program. So I taught actually everything. I taught math, and I taught the classics, and I taught French, and I taught music, and all kinds of stuff, which was a lot of fun. And then at some point I decided I wanted to do science writing, and I went back to graduate school, which was really fun, very fun going from being a professor to being a student, and then started writing about science and math for newspapers and magazines primarily.
Okay, and then you first got sick in 2000, and the book takes us on your journey to understand what the heck was wrong with you. So tell us what your formal diagnosis is or are, and then if it's different from that, how do you describe what's going on in your body? Because I know that what doctors say and maybe what you feel might be different. So tell us about that.
So the onset for me was gradual, and at the time I first started getting sick, I was building my own house. I was working full time. My husband was very ill. It was an over the top stressful moment in my life, and initially the symptoms were just that I was really worn out, and I thought, well, of course I'm worn out. Who wouldn't be? I'm sure it will be fine. And then I finished the house and kind of got my life in order and was not so stressed out, and still was not, like, something was not right. I was having trouble. Both, I didn't have the energy that I used to, but also, like, if I exercised, I felt much worse afterward. So that led to the diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, though not for a long time, actually. Initially, I just thought, I'm not really even sick. Something's not right. And it kind of got worse and worse to the point where it was really interfering with my daily functioning. And then one day I got kind of semi-paralyzed. I couldn't walk. And it was after that I got diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, which did not feel like a very compelling diagnosis. I was like, well, wait, I'm not just tired, I'm paralyzed. Like, really? But there was really no other compelling explanation. And then many years later, in 2012, then I figured out that mold was actually at the heart of it. So at that point, it seemed to be primarily mold illness. And by taking really extreme measures to avoid mold, then I went into an almost complete remission. And I tell that story in my book, the process of figuring that out and what was involved in all that. After the book ends, so at that point I was doing very, very well, exercising, living a full life, doing great. And then my next door neighbor's house flooded, and she put the waste material from her remediation in her yard. I got a whole bunch of exposures. I got very sick again. And at that point, the measures that I took the first time just were not enough to get me better. And eventually I figured out that the ligaments in my neck had actually degraded, apparently from the mold exposures. And I had craniocervical instability. I had surgery for that, and then realized that I also had tethered cord syndrome. So, at this point, the list is myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome, mold illness, or mast cell activation syndrome, which seems to be the mechanism behind mold illness for many people. It's not clear that's a complete explanation for me, but a part of what's going on. Craniocervical instability, although now that I've had surgery, I'm very, very stable. No problems there. And tethered cord syndrome, which again is addressed by surgery.
Thank you for that. So for those of you watching who don't know some of these illnesses, I also was diagnosed in 2003 with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. And at the time, those diagnoses were, I've heard them described as garbage pail or wastebasket diagnoses, meaning that, well, we don't really know what's wrong with you. We've kind of given up like figuring out what's wrong with you. We've sent you to all the specialists. I mean, I had so many tests and, you'd get a few like, okay, well, this is an abnormal result. And I'd say, well, what does that mean? And then, well, it doesn't line up with any known endocrine disorder. So we don't know what that means. And it's very frustrating because you feel terrible. You have no energy. I'm still so amazed that Julie has been able to do everything that she's done, given how poorly she was feeling. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you was because there's a lot of folks in the community, whether you have chronic migraine or multiple conditions, which many people end up having what they call comorbidities, which just means you have more than one thing wrong with you. And so the idea of advocating for yourself through research is kind of what I wanted to talk with Julie about. But I also just wanted to say that having been through a version of this myself, it is incredibly frustrating because doctors kind of don't take you that seriously. They kind of, at some point, feel like you're faking it or making it up or hysterical or you get some vibe along those lines. And to the point where my doctor go ahead.
I was just going to jump in. When I was first diagnosed, it was by a neurologist when I was, as I say, semi-paralyzed, really could hardly walk at all. And he did a few very cursory tests and then said that I had chronic fatigue syndrome. And I was like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And then I was like, okay, so what do I do next? Do I, like, what tests, what doctors, what do I do next? And he had absolutely nothing to say.
Yeah.
And it was clear for him that chronic fatigue syndrome meant, please get out of my office. I have nothing to offer you.
Yeah. And I think there's
for many doctors, that is what it means.
Yeah. And there's a frustration because doctors are used to being able to fix things, whether that's through surgery or through a prescription or through something. And so when they can't, even good doctors, I think mine just got tired of me coming in and not getting better and asking him for help and him not being able to do anything for me. And part of what was going on with me was that my back was actually broken. And so I had this chronic pain condition from a literal broken back. When I finally said, look, I can hardly walk and my leg doesn't really work anymore. Can you at least send me to somebody to look at that? And oh yeah, maybe they can give you a cortisone shot. And then I found out my back had been fractured 15, almost 20 years earlier. And the surgery to repair that, which was not fun, did alleviate that chronic pain, which I think allowed my immune system to kind of calm down enough to where I would describe myself as in remission from chronic fatigue and having a mild case of fibromyalgia. So I'm still not where I might have been had I not had the back injury. But the reason I wanted Julie to start with who she was before she got sick, which is still the same person that she is, by the way, is that, oftentimes people who end up with a bunch of things wrong with us, we're discounted as, all these things I just mentioned, hysterical or whatever. And Julie is the least hysterical person I know. She's very serious. She's very thoughtful. She's incredibly smart. She was a college professor. So, it's something her book is incredibly well written. It's a beautiful memoir and also very compelling. So if you are resonating with this conversation, please do read her book because I think it'll give you a lot of hope. So let's move into the next question, which is how is research?
Actually,
go ahead.
let me just say one other thing.
Yeah.
Things really have changed in the chronic fatigue syndrome world. I just want to kind of throw this
Yes. Yes.
in for people. So if you do have a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, I don't want this conversation to discourage you or make you think that doctors are never going to have anything to offer. I think the biggest kind of progress that has been made is in understanding various comorbidities and helping like there are doctors who are knowledgeable about this and are able to help patients suss out what those comorbidities are and treat them. And sometimes that makes a really big difference. So, and in a lot of different ways, things have really changed in the chronic fatigue syndrome world over the last 15 years. 10, 15 years, and it's not as totally grim
Yes.
as it was
Thank you for that.
when
Yes.
you got sick and when I first got sick.
Yes. Yes. And thank you for that, because
So
that is
don't
important to
despair.
mention. Yes. Important to mention. There has been progress. There are medications, and just a lot more. There's just a lot more awareness that it's a real thing, that it's not some made up
Right,
illness, that people are
right.
faking it, or why we would do this, I do
That's
not know,
right.
but that's a whole nother conversation. Okay. So how has research played a role?
So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so moving into the research
Yeah.
question, I think this is an incredibly important thing because, when you first get sick, you have this, at least I did, I think most people have this expectation that if you get sick, you'll go to a doctor and they'll tell you what's wrong with you and they'll tell you how to treat it and you'll get better, maybe not all the way, but you'll more or less, you'll be able to get better and go on with your life. And it's shocking with any of these poorly understood illnesses. I mean, chronic fatigue syndrome obviously is one of them, but there's kind of a whole medley here, including now long COVID, of illnesses that just, we just don't understand them very well. And kind of the whole model really breaks down at that point. Doctors often are not your allies. And there are not clear answers to be found, and nobody else is going to give them to you. So there's a process that I think we all go through with these illnesses of, first of all, just sort of shock, and then learning how to take responsibility for our own health and take responsibility for figuring out what's wrong with us and what to do. And doctors become one resource among many that we have to use in figuring out our own path forward, rather than doctors being the ones who will tell us what to do. So research is an enormous part of that. And
can you tell us how can people figure out what is crazy stuff they should ignore on the internet and what is legitimate stuff? What's the filter some of the things that you use because there's a lot of crazy stuff on the internet that you absolutely should ignore.
There's a lot of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So the first thing I was going to say is fellow patients are actually the biggest resource. They're going to be your biggest source of information. I certainly spent a lot of time reading scientific literature. It takes a lot of skill to do that. Most of it is not relevant. That's hard going. If you are somebody who has those skills, absolutely dive in and do it. But even there, you're really going to want other patients to talk to about what you're reading and, to find out what papers they've thought are interesting and relevant and all that kind of thing. So really kind of the center of things and figuring out what to do is the patient community. So, the wonderful thing now is that we have the whole online world. There, the kind of the biggest center to find patients is Facebook groups. It seems like that's generally speaking the best source. Although there are also, Twitter has its own little communities, and there are forums and all kinds of stuff. So you'll need to spend some time digging around looking for patient communities. And it's this very rich, complex, and kind of dangerous ecosystem of these patient communities. And so you need to find the groups that resonate for you and where you feel comfortable and where it doesn't just make you crazy. You know, if you're reading in a group and you just feel like, oh my God, like time to leave, get off the computer, you know, take a break, go somewhere else, find another community. So I think one guide is just actually that emotional response. Like, I mean, there are a lot of intellectual skills that are needed, but there are also a lot of emotional skills that are needed in sorting this out. And so having that real self-awareness as you go to communities, meet people, absorb information, like really paying attention to how that sits in your body, in your psyche, how it leaves you feeling, and trust that, you know, if something makes you feel crazy, then step away from it. And if something makes you feel centered, that's a good guide that is worth paying attention to. So that's one key thing I think in doing research is paying attention to your own kind of emotional, physical response to what you're reading. Another key thing I think is really assessing who you're talking to. You know, patients are not all the same. People have very different levels of experience. They also are, you know, their problems are going to be more or less like yours. So the more similar somebody's problems are to yours, obviously, the more likely it is that their answers are going to be effective for you. But no guarantee. I mean, I think another important aspect of this is to recognize you're not going to, you know, nobody's going to be able to give you the answers. So no matter how similar someone seems to you, to be to you, no matter how impressive they seem, whatever, you know, their answers may or may not work for you, and you just have to accept that.
Yeah.
So one level of assessing people is how similar are their issues to yours. Another is just really watching their thought processes. And, you know, so do they offer evidence for what they say? There are lots of different kinds of evidence. You know, certainly one type of evidence is like scientific studies, but another is just careful observations of their own body. You know, if they say, I tried treatment X and it cured me, that's sort of, well, maybe, you know. But if they say, well, I tried treatment X, I took it for 3 months, I noticed these particular changes, I realized that this was actually also having an effect, so I got rid of that, and then the effect was even greater. You know, that kind of like nuanced observation and reporting experiences with, you know, at a kind of granular level, that has a lot more persuasive power. So really look for that. Like when you get the kind of big, like I was cured without any details, that really look suspiciously on that. Or this treatment will cure everything, you know, those kinds of things. I mean, that's not always wrong. Sometimes treatments actually have an impact on lots of different sorts of conditions, but just the sort of statement of this will, you know, cure autism and diabetes, and like it's a fairly worthless statement
Right.
to be ignored. And then, I mean, not necessarily to make you think, okay, that treatment is worthless, but like, okay, that doesn't persuade me.
Yes.
What else do you have to say?
And also I think, you know, if you see a group and the word cure and miracle and things like that are coming up a lot, that would be a group I
Right.
might be super
Probably
skeptical
not.
about.
Yes.
The people running the group, you know, if they're selling something, that's different than, you know, people who are, it's a
Yeah, that's a
patient
very
group.
good point.
Like I have a support group for my readers. I have a Sunday welcome that I paste, you know, welcome the new people that week. And I am very clear that the book is not a cure for migraine. We don't accept links to miracle cures in this group. So there's a sort of the guidelines are there and the group is moderated. And so that's another thing to think about. And also, I would just say, because I did that, I went to a bunch of the migraine groups in different areas. And there are groups that their ethos is kind of like, this is a place to come and complain about how horrible it is to have this illness. And I understand the need for that. And initially, when you are diagnosed, that can be helpful to just go and, complain. But that energy was not helpful to me in terms of my process of figuring out how to move forward with my diagnosis.
Right.
And so part of what I chose to do with the group that I run is that it is a very positive space, and that is kind of upfront that it's that. There's plenty of other places to go if that's not what you want. So that's the thing, is there's lots of choice. One of the things I say in my book is to promote yourself to the head of your medical team. You are the head of your medical team, and you can hire a whole bunch of different people to be on that team and listen to all their advice, but you're the person who's living in your body every day. And even the best doctor, if you see them every 3 months, you're doing great, in terms of their availability. So you have to still be have the agency around that. And then the last thing I'll say about the groups is that I think it's important to register that you kind of touched on it with how you feel in the group. But I think there are places that challenges our boundaries a lot. Someone will write a really long post that's a really sad story, and a whole bunch of people will jump in and spend a lot of time trying to help that person. And then a week later, that person's back asking for more energy from people. And I have found that that is not helpful to me to be part of those conversations. And so I've become a lot more discerning about engaging. Just because I read something doesn't mean I have to respond to it. And so I might kind of monitor a group and not really participate very much, but get some information from that group. And then there are other groups that feel a lot more my vibe, and I'll spend more time and I will put in more energy because I can tell that I'll get fed in return. And so that's just something I think, especially when we have limited energy, whether you have chronic fatigue syndrome, whether you're a COVID long hauler, whether you're chronic migraine, you only have so much focus time in a day where you can be on a screen. And so you really need to think about what's going to serve me the best in this. As you have any other tips? Go ahead.
Yeah, one other thing that occurs to me is it's important to think about it in terms of building your own community. I mean, you're participating in these existing patient communities, but the way that becomes really valuable and meaningful is by cultivating real relationships. Initially, it takes a while to find the groups and communities that you resonate with most. If you're in a group that you don't resonate with very much, you can still, you may be able to glean specific tips or whatnot, but also look for the people that you do resonate with in that community. And those people may help you find your way to groups that you like better. And cultivating those relationships then makes your participation in the group so much more meaningful. And it also makes a huge difference in just dealing with being sick. It is so hard, and it is so far from the experience of healthy people. And you really need the support of friends who get it. So that's part of what comes from participating in these groups. So, kind of going into it looking for that, how do I create a real community for myself that will support me and nurture me and help me find my way? I think that makes a huge difference.
Yes. And how do you recommend people conduct research for themselves without wearing themselves out? Do you have any tips about that?
Well, again, I think turning to the patient community is really huge. Then when when you hear about some idea for some treatment or whatnot, try to get a variety of people's experiences with it. Like if one person has done great, then that's worth knowing, but how has it been for other people? Do some, like try to leave one little bubble, if you're hearing about it in one group, try to step outside that group to get information about it elsewhere. And also at that point, if you have a really specific thing that you're trying to understand, that's the point where it may be useful to actually go to the scientific literature if if your brain is working well enough for that and you have those skills. Even those of us who do have those skills can't always take that on. Although what I found also is for most of us, our capacity varies a lot. So, even if you're really, really cognitively impaired overall, often there are moments in a day when you can tackle something that takes a fair amount of brain power. So I think those kind of harder things actually are accessible to a larger proportion of us than you might expect.
I'll just say one thing about the literature, and then I'll let you finish. So I have a master's of public health, which I graduated in 1987. So when I started doing a literature review for this book, that was in 2015, 2016. So it had been close to 30 years since I was reading that kind of literature. Right. And I would go to UCSD's medical library and I would pull all these PDFs and I would come home and I would print them out and then I would sit and try to read these studies and I would get, I'd literally read 3 words and look up the 4th and 3 words and look up the 4th. I mean, it took forever to get my brain back into that mode of really being able to understand. But the nice thing is that every scientific study that gets published has what's called an abstract. And that usually is free on the internet. Sometimes you can't even see the whole study without paying for that journal. But the abstract is reasonably well written in layman's terms, and it will at least give you a sense of what that study showed and what it's about and what the results are. So you can go to PubMed, PubMed, I think it's .org, and search, and you'll, whatever your condition is or whatever you're looking for, and you will probably find a bunch of those abstracts that will come up. And at the very least, you can read those and try to figure those out. And that's at least a way to start to validate maybe some of these patient experiences that you're hearing about.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Another thing, if you're able to push a little bit further, and also depending on which parts of your brain are working well and which aren't, the figures often contain a lot of the more detailed information about the study. So,
the figures being like the graphs and the charts and the different, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they're, tables or figures. So, if you've got, say, a trial of a drug, there may be a graph that says, okay, for people age 20 to 30, here's the proportion who, responded well versus responded poorly or whatever. It obviously depends on the study.
Sure.
But very often you can get a lot of the information of the kind of real meat, sort of at a more detailed level than the abstract provides, just by looking at those figures.
Yeah, so the abstract, looking at the figures, and then reading the conclusion, because that's how they're all set up.
Exactly.
You can kind of skim or skip the rest of it if you just don't have the brain power or the energy, and still get a lot of the basics from that, because you don't really need to know like how the scientific analysis was conducted, and you don't necessarily need, I mean, it's helpful to know how many patients were like in a study, which is called the N. So if it's 26 people versus 3,000 people, that tells you, which one to maybe is more valid. Is the larger studies can be generally more valid because they just are, have more people that participated in them. So I think this is really helpful. Okay, so how would you describe resilience?
When you're chronically ill, there's such a huge amount of loss involved, and there's no way around that. A lot of those losses, at least, it just is really difficult experience where so many things you care about just aren't available to you. And to me, resilience is about being able to construct a new kind of meaning for yourself in the face of all of that loss. To be able to say, okay, like, I thought my satisfaction in life was going to come from taking hikes and being the capable, active person who could get anything done. And that's just not, that's not on offer anymore, at least for the time being. Maybe someday it will be, but right now it's not. So how do I construct a sense of myself and a sense of my life where I can still feel like I'm contributing, where I can still feel like there's meaning and value? It's hard when you're really, really sick. Over the last few years, significant portions of it, I've been so sick that really just surviving the day was all I could do. And it's very hard in that kind of circumstance to feel like you're contributing when, all you're doing is getting through the day. But a big part of what I've ended up thinking about that is, in general, my kind of attitude toward life is that I'm here to serve, and I'm always looking for that path of service. And so if I'm in a situation where all I can do is survive and suffer in the meantime, like, I can still do that in the spirit of service and accept that there is meaning and value to suffering through my day and getting to the other side of it and still being alive and still breathing and still being who I am. So hopefully most of our viewers are not at that state, and have some more options available to them and how to construct meaning for themselves. But to me, what resilience is about is, like, whatever's taken away from you, to be able to say, okay, here's what I've still got. Here's how I can construct my own sense of meaning and purpose and value to my life.
Thank you. That was beautiful. It reminded me of when in 2003, when I was off work because I was so sick before I got the back diagnosis. And all I could do was sit in the garden. I couldn't read because I couldn't concentrate. And if I watched a movie, it would wear me out and I would have to sleep for an hour and a half. And I couldn't shop or do groceries or clean or do laundry or any of the stuff and I certainly couldn't work. And I just remember I had been such a doer, and so much of my self-worth was around what I did for other people and how I performed and how I, made, things happen at work, or, through the party, through the shower, through the surprise, got the card. I was that person. I was that Energizer bunny. And I just remember having a conversation with one of my sisters, and she's like, oh, well, you have all this time, are you scrapbooking? And I was like, no, I can't. And she's like, well, but so what are you doing? Like, you're catching up on reading? And I was like, no, I can't read. I can, like, maybe like People magazine, I can read like a paragraph, and and then I have to sleep for an hour. And so I'm really just kind of watching the butterflies fly around. And I just remember it was a true crisis of identity, because I thought, if I never get any better than this, am I worth taking up space and breathing? Like, if I can't be the wife I thought I was supposed to be to my husband, not that I question his love for me, because he's amazing and we're still together, but if I can't do those things, what value do I have in the world? If I can't travel and do, or have the job that I had, and I had to start really, like you said, constructing a new idea of what my worth was. And it was much more based on, are there ways I can be of service? I mean, you're being of service right now by doing this interview, right? It may not be what you envisioned for yourself years ago, but you are being of service. And I know you're of service to many people when you share things. You've been helpful to me. We met online. We've never met in person. I don't know if we'll ever meet.
Right.
But I feel like we're friends. So there is a lot that technology allows people with disabilities to do that was not available to us 20 years ago. And that is a wonderful thing. And I think also people with disabilities are way more vocal than people used to be, and are kind of demanding that, that we do have value. And just because we can't do X doesn't mean we don't have value. So I just wanted to respond to that because it absolutely resonated with me a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So
another aspect of that sense of resilience to me, like the way that I carry that for myself, is I work really hard to be willing, for whatever happens. So that rather than being kind of dragged into it, scraping and clawing, like, no, I want to be the capable person. No, this isn't me. No, I hate this. To be able to say, like, to do the internal work to say, okay, like, this is my life right now, and I'm going to, like, really live it. I'm going to, when it's awful, I'm going to feel that awfulness through and through, and, like, not try to make that okay, but to say, yep, like, I'm willing to have it be this awful. I hate it, but this is part of what's being alive, and I'm willing. Yep, this is part of the human experience. I want the whole thing. Like, I want to live the whole thing, and that includes this totally sucky moment. And I feel like there's a sort of feel like that has a kind of inherent value, like that willingness to whatever is, that living through anything willingly is an act of service. Like, even if nobody observes it, even if it doesn't directly impact any other human being, there's that, being in that heart space. Again, no matter how much you don't like it, how pissed off you are, whatever, like, really living it and doing so willingly feels like a powerful contribution to the world to me.
Thank you. So my last question is, what are some self-care resilience strategies that you personally have found most helpful?
Well, I often recommend people copious doses of whining.
Oh, I love it.
I think we often work really hard to have a good attitude about things, and we want to be the good patient. We want to be the trooper who, we want to do it well, and I think we need to give ourselves a break from that frequently, and just, like, this is awful. And I mean, obviously you don't want to live your whole life in that state of whining, but my experience is that giving it really like full free reign for a while, then I get sort of bored with it after a while. There's a point where like I'm ready to move on, and my own whining seems ridiculous to me. But really, really giving myself permission, and even like ramping it up, like all the energy into the wine, like wine as ridiculously as you possibly can until it makes you laugh. I find that to be really, really, really helpful, because then, like having done that, then the place of willingness and gratitude and like all of those feelings that we want to have can kind of emerge in a genuine, authentic way, rather than just being, I don't want to feel bad, and so I'm going to put on a happy face, which really just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So that's, I guess I'm expressing that in terms of whining, but I mean it more generally, like let yourself feel bad. Like these experiences are incredibly hard. They just are. The losses are devastating, and we can't smile that away. And trust yourself that feeling like that you can survive feeling how awful it is, and just sort of let that wash over you, and then let the resilience emerges out of fully experiencing the difficulty.
Thank you. That was a great answer that no one else has given. So that's awesome. Julie, thank you again for being here today and sharing your story. Please check out her website, Julie Rehmeyer, that's REHMEYER.com, to learn more about her work. You can buy Through the Shadowlands wherever books are sold. Check out other episodes of the Resilience series on Facebook Watch, IGTV, and YouTube. Follow me at SWeaverMPH to learn more about my upcoming book, The Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook, which is due out in spring 2022 from Surrey Books. Thanks so much for watching, everyone.
Thanks so much. Really fun being here.